Wyoming Territory, March 1882, rain fell hard against the tin roof of the barn. A cold, steady drumming that matched the ache in Russell McCrae's right shoulder. He set the rusted pitchfork aside, wiped the sweat from his brow, and turned toward the barn doors just as a loud knock echoed through the storm. He hesitated. Folks did not come knocking on barns this time of night, not out here, 12 miles from the nearest town. The knock came again, 3 sharp raps. Urgent. Russell opened the door. A woman stood there, soaked to the bone, her dress clinging to her like it had been glued on, her hair plastered to her cheeks. Her belly was round, he could see that even through the wet fabric. She was very pregnant and her hands were trembling. "I need help," she said, voice hoarse and barely above a whisper. "Please." Russell stepped back without a word and motioned her inside. She limped past him, one hand on her belly, the other gripping the side of the doorway for balance. He shut the door behind her, sealing out the wind. "Sit," he said, dragging over a wooden crate. "You're freezing." "I walked," she said, barely able to lower herself down. "From the road. My horse collapsed miles back." He grabbed an old wool blanket from the loft ladder and wrapped it around her shoulders. "What's your name?" "Willa," she said after a pause. "Willa Jennings." Russell squatted beside her, his brows drawn. "How far along are you?" 8 months. "Maybe a little more." She winced and shifted. "I think I overdid it." He ran a hand through his hair. "You got family nearby?" "No," she said, eyes sliding away. "No one, just me." Russell stood. "You cannot stay out here, the house is warmer." She lifted her face to his. "I do not want to be trouble. You knock on my barn in the middle of a storm, carrying a child, and you think you are trouble? Come on." Willa sat by the fire in Russell's small log cabin, holding a mug of warm tea between her hands. Her dress had dried some, and he had given her one of his flannel shirts to wear. It hung off her shoulders, but it was dry and warm. He kept glancing at her from the stove, like he was still trying to figure out how she got here. "You sure you do not want me to ride into town?" he asked. "Doctor is there, I can bring him." "No," she said quickly. "Please." He studied her for a beat. "Someone chasing you," she flinched. Russell nodded once. He did not press. "I do not want them to find me," she added, voice soft. "I just want to have this baby safe." "Start over." He handed her a bowl of stew. "Then that is what you will do. You can stay here." Willa stared at him. "Why would you help me?" He sat down across from her, his eyes steady. "Because someone should have helped my sister, but no one did." She blinked, her grip tightening on the bowl. "She was 18, he said. "Pregnant, left alone in a town that judged her before they ever spoke to her. She died giving birth. I came home too late." Willa's eyes filled. "I am so sorry." Russell looked down at his hands. "I cannot go back and change it. But I can sure as hell make sure it does not happen again." That night, Willa lay on the cot he had set up by the hearth. Russell sat in the rocking chair nearby, boots off, legs stretched out, rifle across his lap. "You think they will come?" he asked quietly. She did not answer right away. "Then I left a man who thinks he owns me. He is not the father, he does not like being told no." Russell nodded slowly. "If he shows up here, he will leave worse than he came." Willa looked at him. "Why are you alone out here?" He did not answer at first. Then he said, "Went to war too young, came back too angry. Folks around town figure I am good with horses and bad with people." "You do not seem bad," she said, voice soft. He met her gaze. "You do not seem like trouble." Over the next few days, the storm broke. The skies cleared. Willa stayed. She helped in the kitchen as best she could, folding laundry between rests, rubbing her belly when the baby kicked. Russell watched her quietly, like she was a puzzle he had not expected to want to solve. One afternoon, she really laughed as she tried to feed an ornery hen that kept pecking at her boots. Russell heard it from across the yard and froze, the sound catching him off guard. It had been a long time since laughter lived in this place. "So what is the plan?" Russell asked her one morning as they sat on the steps of the porch, sipping coffee. "Have the baby," she said. "Hold them close, figure out what kind of mother I am, maybe raise them somewhere quiet." He looked out across the pasture. "This place is quiet," she glanced at him. "You would let us stay," Russell turned to her. "You are already here." That night she woke him with a cry. He was up in an instant, knocking over the chair as he rushed to her side. She doubled over, gripping her belly, sweat on her forehead. "It is time," she gasped. "All right," he said, throwing more wood in the fire. "All right, I got you." He had never delivered a baby before, but he had seen it. Twice. And he figured if she could endure it, the least he could do was not pass out. She gripped his hand so tight he thought his fingers might break. She screamed, cried, cursed, then went silent, eyes locked on his. "You are not leaving," she said. "Not going anywhere," he whispered. And then, after hours of pain and sweat and whispered prayers, a cry broke through the cabin. A baby girl. Willa held her daughter to her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. She looked up at Russell, who stood nearby, blood on his sleeves, all written across his face. "She is perfect," Willa whispered. He knelt beside her, gently brushing the baby's wet curls. "You did it," he said, voice thick. Willa looked at him. "We did." The next morning, Russell stood in the doorway, watching the sunrise. Willa came up behind him, the baby cradled in her arms. "She needs a name," she said. He looked down at the tiny bundle. "You have one in mind, Zara," Willa said. "It means dawn, felt right," he nodded. "Zara McCrae," Willa looked up at him, startled. "I know I am not her father," he said quietly. "But I would like to be, if you will let me." Willa's eyes filled again, but this time there was no fear in them. Only something warm and steady. "Yes," she whispered. Russell reached out, cupped her cheek, and kissed her slow, sure, like he had known her forever, and in her arms Zara stirred. The sun rose higher. The storm had passed. The snow melted slow that spring, leaving the ground soft and stubborn with mud. Russell moved the horses to higher pasture while Willa rocked Zara on the porch, the baby tucked against her chest beneath a shawl she'd sewn from scraps found in the trunk at the foot of his bed. She hummed without noticing, something low and wandering. The sound filtered through the open window where Russell stood drying his hands on a rag. He watched her a long while before stepping out. "I'll need to check the south fence tomorrow," he said, easing onto the step beside her. "Last storm took down part of it." "I can come," she offered. "You've barely healed." "I've healed enough." Zara stirred at the tone in her voice, and Willa adjusted the shawl softly. Russell didn't argue. He handed her a biscuit wrapped in cloth and sat quiet beside her as the day warmed. After a moment, Willa asked, "What happened to your parents?" He didn't answer right away. "Father died building the barn. Rafter gave way. Mother stayed a few seasons after, then left for her sister in Kansas. Couldn't bear the quiet." Willa looked out over the fields. "You stayed." "There was no one else to tend the land." She didn't say anything, just passed him the biscuit so he could tear a piece for himself. That night, after Zara was settled in the cradle Russell built from pine boards behind the stove, Willa braided her hair while he read through the ledger at the kitchen table. The quiet between them had grown easy, like a space they both knew how to inhabit. "Do you want her to call you Pa?" Willa asked, voice even. He turned the page slowly. "Only if it comes natural." "It might," she said. "You're the only one who's ever held her like she mattered." Russell reached for the candle to trim the wick. "Then I'll be ready when it does." They didn't speak after that, but when she passed behind him to gather the kettle, her hand rested briefly on his shoulder. He didn't move. By late April, Willa had taken over the garden. She planted onions, cabbage, and carrots in long rows, her hands steady even when the wind picked up. Russell built a small gate to keep the deer out, and they worked side by side without needing much talk. One morning, she handed him a cloth bundle before he saddled up for town. "Trade this embroidery for sugar if you can," she said. "And thread. If not, keep it. We might need it later." Russell untied the bundle to check the stitching. It was fine work, delicate wildflowers in blue and gold thread along the edge of a cotton handkerchief. "You made this," she nodded. "I used to sew commissions for a dressmaker in Helena. Before," he folded it carefully. "You want me to leave a name?" "No," she said. "No names." He rode into town just after sunup and returned well past dark, Zara asleep in the sling Willa had tied around her front. When he stepped off the horse, he handed her a small bag, sugar and thread and 2 tin spoons. Clerk tried to guess who made the stitching. I didn't answer. She took the bag and looked up at him in the lantern light. Thank you. Russell touched her elbow before stepping past. You don't owe me thanks. She followed him inside, her shoulders a little straighter than they'd been that morning. One evening in early May, a wagon passed along the ridge, too slow to be a traveler and too quiet for freight. Willa stood at the window, her breath shallow. Russell reached for the rifle and checked the sight, his expression unreadable. They didn't stop, he said after a minute, but they could come back. He nodded. They could. Zara began to cry then, and Willa turned from the curtain without another word. Russell stepped outside and sat on the porch until the moon rose high. The wagon didn't return. The next day, Willa asked to learn how to shoot. Russell didn't lecture or question. He set up a row of bottles on the fence post and handed her the pistol he kept in the drawer under the medicine tin. You'll feel the kick in your wrist, he said. Don't lock your elbow, let it give a little. She fired once. Missed. He adjusted her stance, stepping behind her, his hand guiding hers without words. The second shot shattered the bottle clean. She didn't smile, but he saw something shift in her eyes. That night, after the dishes were dried and Zara was nursing, Willa said, I never thought I'd be here. Not just in Wyoming, here with someone like you. Russell leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. What did you think? I thought I'd be running forever, he nodded once. You're not running now. She looked at him across the table. No, I'm not. A breeze lifted the curtain and the fire cracked low behind them. Willa reached out, her fingers brushing his. He turned his palm to catch hers. Neither of them let go. By mid-June, the high plains turned soft with color prairie smoke blooming among the sage, and the first wild lupine blushing violet along the creek edge. Willa carried Zara in a sling stitched from old flour sacks, her steps steady and sure now, her pace matched to the rhythm of the land. Russell watched her from the hay yard as she moved between rows of sprouting cabbage, one hand brushing the leaves, the other keeping the baby tucked close. He kept his mouth shut most days, but there were things he noticed. How she folded her sleeves twice and no higher, how she always stepped around the same knot in the floorboard, how she sang to Zara only when she thought he wasn't near. That evening, after the animals were fed and the sun had slipped behind the distant ridge, Russell returned from the creek with a string of trout. He found Willa on the porch, her shawl pinned against the wind, Zara asleep in the cradle beside her. Water's warming. I'll cook, he said. You sit. I don't mind frying, she offered. You cleaned them. You've done enough today, she tilted her head. You keeping tally, he shrugged. I keep track of what matters. Willa stood after a pause, brushing her hands clean on her skirt. Then I'll make the biscuits. You always forget the salt. He didn't argue. Inside, the cabin filled with the smell of cornmeal batter and frying fish. The lamp threw long shadows on the plank walls, and the wind pressed against the windows like breath. As she stirred the dough, Willa asked, You ever think about leaving this place? Russell leaned against the counter, arms crossed. Used to, after the war, thought maybe I'd head south. Arizona maybe, but I never did. Why not? He looked at her, the lamplight catching in his beard. Wasn't anything ahead of me worth chasing, not until now. She didn't look away, but her voice softened. You think this what we have is something you want to keep? I already do. Willa folded the dough without speaking, her brow drawn in thought. A beat passed before she said, My father taught me to gut a deer when I was 7. He said if you can bring something into this world, you better know how to keep it fed. Russell's eyes didn't shift from hers. He's still living, she shook her head. He died the winter I turned 15. After that, there wasn't much left to hold on to. You held onto yourself. She nodded once, then turned back to the stove. That night, after Zara had stirred and settled again, Willa pulled the quilt tighter around her shoulders and stared at the ceiling. Russell sat nearby, oiling the stock of his rifle. Do you miss speaking to people? She asked quietly. Town's not far, but you don't go unless you have to. Most people talk too much or not honest, and I'm not either of those, no, he said, setting the cloth aside. You're the first person I've known who says only what needs saying." She turned her face toward him. "And that's enough for you," he nodded. "It's more than I expected to get." The next morning, she was the one who rose first. She set Zara in the basket lined with cotton scraps and walked to the barn to fetch the dried herbs she'd hung weeks before. Russell found her there, standing with her hands resting on the beam above the workbench, her eyes closed. "You all right?" he asked. "Just needed quiet." He waited. After a moment, she turned. "I've been thinking about what kind of life I want to give her, what kind of woman I want her to become. You're already showing her. She needs more than survival. She needs steadiness, a name that means something." He stepped closer. "She's got mine if you'll have it." Willa stared at him, the barn quiet but for the click of the wind shifting the latch. "I never thought I'd be offered anything like that," she said. "You're not being offered," he said gently. "You're being chosen." She stepped forward until his breath touched her cheek. "Then ask me plain." He looked at her without hesitation. "Marry me." She didn't smile. She just reached for his face and kissed him, slow and certain, her hands warm against his jaw. When they pulled apart, she said, "I will." They walked back to the house side by side, the sun high and strong above them, and behind the shutters, Zara stirred against the morning light. The preacher arrived on horseback 3 days after the letter was sent, his coat dusty, his eyes squinting against the brightness of an early June morning. He dismounted slow, favoring one knee, and tied his mare to the post without needing guidance. Willa stood on the porch holding Zara, and Russell stepped out behind her, wiping sawdust from his hands. "Reverend Caraway," the man introduced, lifting his hat, "came through from Laramie." "Appreciate you making the trip," Russell said, offering his hand. "Don't get many reasons to ride out this far that aren't sad ones," the Reverend replied. "A wedding's a fine excuse." They'd cleared a space near the cottonwood stump where Russell's father used to split wood, now overgrown with sage and shaded by the spreading limbs. Willa wore a dress stitched from unbleached muslin and trimmed with a strip of blue calico she'd saved from an old petticoat. She'd tied her hair back with a strip of linen, the ends tucked neat. She didn't wear shoes. Zara slept in the cradle basket under the cottonwood, shaded and still. Russell wore his cleanest shirt, the one with the stitched collar, and boots he'd oiled the night before. His hands were rough, but he held hers with care as the Reverend spoke. "Do you come of your own will, without force, burden, or debt?" the Reverend asked Russell. "I do," Russell said. "And you?" he asked Willa. "I do," she answered, her voice steady. No rings were exchanged, just a prayer and a nod. Then the Reverend stepped back and Russell leaned forward and kissed her slow, his hand brushing her jaw. Zara stirred once but didn't cry. After the Reverend rode off with a fresh loaf of bread and a handful of dried pears, Willa stood at the edge of the garden watching the sky. Russell came to stand beside her, his thumb hooked in his belt. "You all right?" he asked. "I've never been anyone's wife before," she said. "I keep waiting to feel different." "You don't have to feel anything," he said. "You just have to keep waking up here." She looked up at him. "I think that's the part I like best." That night, after the animals were settled and Zara had fallen asleep between them on the straw-filled mattress, Willa leaned her head against Russell's shoulder. "I'd like to teach her to read when she's old enough," she said. "She'll learn from the best," he answered. "I only finished school through my 12th year," she murmured. "That's 12 years more than I had," he said. "You'll do just fine." She traced the edge of the quilt with her finger. "Think she'll ever need to know how to fight?" Russell looked toward the shadows beyond the window. "Maybe, but I'd rather she know how to stand her ground before she has to lift her hands." Willa was quiet a long time. Then she said, "I want her to grow up with more than fear." "She will," he said. "She already is." By late June, they'd built a new coop behind the shed. Willa took to feeding the hens each morning before the sun cleared the ridge, tucking Zara beneath a wide-brimmed hat in her sling, humming low as she scattered seed. Russell hauled timber for a new fence along the east slope, where the wind came sharp and steady. They didn't speak as much during the day anymore, but not out of silence. The rhythm between them had settled into something understood. The way he always left her the first cup of coffee, the way she checked the gate latch after he passed through it. One evening, as Russell sharpened a drawknife on the porch, Willa sat with Zara in her lap, a scrap of muslin in her hand. "I've been thinking we should write down her days," she said. "Not just when she walks or gets a tooth. Everything." He looked up at that. "Like a journal, something close." "Not for us, for her, so she'll know where she comes from," Russell nodded. "You started, I'll keep it when you can't." She smiled faintly but didn't look up. "Then I'll begin tomorrow." That night, Willa stood at the doorway while Russell banked the fire. She reached for his hand. "I'm glad I knocked," she said. He pulled her close, his palm against the small of her back. "I was waiting long before you did." They stood like that a while, no words left between them, just the sound of wind in the grass and the faint breath of a sleeping child. The wind came in warmer that July, carrying with it the scent of sun-warmed grass and creek moss. The cottonwood leaves whispered above the cabin, and the days stretched long and silver with light. Willa had begun rising earlier before Russell stirred, to sit with Zara in the hush of dawn and press her thoughts into the little ledger they kept. Her handwriting was small and careful, the ink faint in places where the nib had dulled. Russell had added to it once a few lines about the first time Zara grasped his finger and didn't let go. He hadn't said much after, but she'd found the page folded once, like it mattered. They were mending the barn roof when the first letter came. Russell found it tucked beneath the feed sack on the porch bench, the wax seal cracked from damp. The paper was creased and dirty, the ink slanted and hasty. He didn't open it. Willa was inside, boiling water for the wash, her sleeves rolled above her elbows. When he stepped through the door, she looked up. "Something wrong," letter came, he said. "From someone who knows your name." She didn't reach for it. Her hands stayed in the steam. "What did it say?" "Haven't read it." She nodded and took the kettle off the hook. "Burn it." Russell set it on the edge of the stove. "If you ever want to know what's in it, I'll read it to you." "I already do," she said. That night, after Zara had settled, Willa stitched in the light of the lantern while Russell carved the last of the fence rails. The baby's cradle was quiet, the air thick with summer heat. "You ever think about building more rooms?" Willa asked. "Thought about it last time I had to step over your mending to get to the basin." She smiled without looking up. "I meant, for when she's older." "For when we've grown." Russell set the chisel aside. "How many you thinking?" She lifted her eyes. "2, maybe 3. He leaned forward, resting his arms on his knees. "You wanting more children?" Willa's voice was soft. "I think I do with you." He didn't speak for a moment. "Then I'd like them to have your eyes." "Mine," she laughed gently. "Why not yours?" "Because yours see the world better than mine ever did." In late August, Russell took Willa and Zara to the high ridge beyond the pasture, where the wind swept clean and the view stretched all the way to the far hills. He'd packed a cloth bundle with smoked meat and apples, and Willa carried a folded quilt tied with twine. They sat beneath the sky while Zara napped in the shade of a juniper bush, and Willa leaned back into the crook of Russell's arm. "This is the furthest I've been without fear," she said. "Then I'll keep taking you further." She reached for his hand. "I want to teach her to trust the land, to feel safe where her feet touch." "She will," Russell said. "This place is hers." Willa was quiet for a long time, then she said, "I used to think I wouldn't live past 25. Not because of anything certain, just the way things were going." Russell's thumb brushed her knuckles. "And now? Now I think I'll live long enough to see her children born." That autumn, they built the new room. Russell cut the lumber himself, and Willa helped raise the frame, her stitches and hammer blows crossing paths daily. Zara crawled through sawdust and fallen leaves, her hands always reaching, her mouth full of new sounds. The room stood square and solid by the first frost, a window facing east so the sun would find her each morning. Willa hung a curtain sewn from an old feed sack and laid a rug of braided wool in the center. They moved Zara's cradle there the next night, and Willa stood in the doorway watching her sleep. Russell came up behind her quiet. She's never known anywhere else, Willa said. This is her whole world. He wrapped an arm around her waist. And it's a good one. In December, they traded a dozen eggs and a jar of plum preserves for a Bible from a traveling peddler, its spine cracked but pages whole. Willa placed it on the mantel and opened it to the blank family record page. She dipped the nib carefully and wrote their names, Russell McCrae and Willa Jennings McCrae. Beneath that, she wrote Zara Dawn McCrae, born March 3rd. She didn't write anything else. Not yet. Snow came heavy that winter and the cabin held warm. Russell made toys from pine scraps a horse, a set of stacking rings, and Willa read aloud in the evenings, her voice steady even when the wind howled over the roof. They passed the season like that, steady, quiet together. When the thaw came, Willa planted peas and potatoes, her belly beginning to swell again beneath her apron. Russell built a new cradle. Zara clapped when he sanded the edges smooth. One morning, Willa stood at the edge of the porch, her hand resting on her middle, watching the sun rise with eyes full of certainty. Russell came to stand beside her. "What are you thinking?" he asked. "That I never once imagined this," she said. "Not the land or the quiet or you." He slipped his hand into hers. "You don't have to imagine anymore." She turned to him, her face lit with morning light. "I love you." "I know," he said, and kissed her slow, like every day before and every day to come. They stayed like that until Zara tugged at his boot and laughed, the sound clear and bright as spring itself. And in that moment, beneath the wide Wyoming sky, with the fields greening and the house whole and full, it was plain to both of them. They'd come all the way through the dark. And they were homed.